Hi, humans. We are just going to get started. I haven't said that phrase in a while, but welcome to LX2 Codependency Coaching Podcast. I am Stella. We are recording, and it is a Friday. Happy Halloween to those of you who celebrate. I was thinking about my trip to Ireland, and we left on the 31st. Halloween was actually invented in Ireland. And so that was really cool to be in, where were we? Dublin. We were in Dublin that day. And I say we because I went with my accountability buddy. She flew into Athens and then flew with me to Ireland. And that was a magical time. Uh, but I wanted to come on and give you a quick podcast this week. Was thinking about this idea of doing your best. And it came in the context of like I was talking to a client who we've done a lot of work, and a lot of times when we get to that place of kind of acceptance or forgiveness to whatever degree, but mostly acceptance of the job that our parents did at in our childhood, we like to say, well, they did the best with what they had or whatever. And that's true, right? I do recognize that that does help us to get to a level of acceptance or just understanding the circumstances of why things happened to whatever degree. And this is not to absolve anybody or not to say, like, not to minimize some of the challenges that people have gone through in their childhood, but we give this idea of like they did the best with what they had, right? And I think I've said before, parents love their kids the best they can. And a lot of times that's not always the best, but it's the best they can at the time. Thing about doing your best is it's relative and it's a moving target. The follow up has to be, and then when you learn more things or you know better, you do better, which is a famous quote by Maya Angelou. And when I think about doing your best, that can mean all kinds of things. It doesn't necessarily need to mean that you are just accepting the bare minimum, which, see how the words are different? Bare minimum versus doing your best. And sometimes your best is the bare minimum. But it had me thinking about this idea, right? So I was talking to my client, and their parent often is someone who says, I did the best I could. Sometimes in an obfuscation or dismissive kind of way. And a lot of times when we are confronting our parents when we are adults or teenagers or whatever, and we are acknowledging some of the challenges that we've experienced, sometimes parents will not take accountability and they use that phrase, it just did the best I could, right? I have used that phrase, and I have also worked on doing better, right? Every time, and I tell new parents, and certainly, parents of onlys or whatever, like, you're a new parent every time you experience a new behavior from your child, right? And it's funny because parents often say, well, there's no handbook or whatever. There's no handbook on being a kid either. And every time you experience something new, we are, with grace, trying to figure out how to navigate that experience, doing our best, right? Whatever the best is at the time. Unfortunately, and I am also guilty of this, both as a human being and as a parent, is that I had an expectation of what the best was that was not always helpful. My fan just died. That was that sound. Actually, the fan noise. That's just the fan that I have going. Anyway, so back to doing your best. Really thinking about this idea of like, if you have an unrealistic or unhelpful expectation of what the best is, sometimes we are pushing for an outcome that we can't get. And again, back to like new parents or whatever. I tell them often, like, okay, you're new to parenting this 8-year-old, this 9-year-old, this 10-year-old, this 15-year-old. That is a new experience to you. And even if you have multiple children, the individual that you're parenting at the time has their own set of experiences, their own set of, behaviors and reactions and all of the things. And so doing our best, like I said, is a moving target. It's a process. It's not just a benchmark of like, this is what the best is. I think we have been given standards of what parenting is, and really thinking about like my experience today is very different than, let's say, 25, when I was 25 and I was parenting a 5-year old and I had not, taken all the human development classes, and I hadn't even created a standard that was realistic because I was just like trying to figure out how to parent from this perspective of like being an unwed mother and being young and having, the weight of the world of like what was supposed to happen. And I have said, unfortunately, I do give myself a lot of grace and I do love that version of me. But I had said to my child, I was like, you're going to be the best of the best because you are not going to be a reflection of my mistakes. I didn't say the second part, but I was like, I had that expectation, right? So we were doing flashcards. I had her reading before kindergarten. I was like, you're going to look and behave in all of these ways. It's funny, she said to me, because we were talking about, parenting in general, and I was like, yeah, we're gonna have to manage like slouching behavior. And she said, I've been complimented on my posture, Mom, more than once. I was like, good on me, like that's awesome. But it was an expectation I had, right? I did flamenco dancing when I was a child, and posture was a really big part of that. And so posture is important, right? So is chewing with your mouth closed. So is, brushing your teeth before you go to bed. You have no idea how many parents struggle with getting their kids to brush their teeth for reasons. I get it. Cavities are expensive. But the fights that we choose to have when we are not feeling our best, notice I said feeling our best because then the doing happens later. But when we're not feeling our best, or we're not feeling confident, or we're not feeling well rested or well fed or whatever, that best is probably lower than what your best is under perfect circumstances. And so there are parents often having either morning fights or night fights about brushing your teeth. And again, the gold standard is brush your teeth twice a day for at least 2 minutes. You can look that up. But we don't always meet that standard, especially when life is lifing, right? When we have all of these other pressures. And so I think about the 25-year-old version of me, and I think about all of the pressure that I put on myself, therefore putting on my child, of what I expected from them. And it's curious now, thinking about it, again, with grace and loving the version of myself that was doing her best, and I got better at doing it differently. That whole notion of like pick your battles, super, super important, really recognizing that we don't have to jump into everyone's chaos when someone, and especially a little, is having big feelings. Doing our best is not matching energy with, a screaming 4-year-old. Like that's not helpful for them or you. Co-regulating our emotions is a matter of going, I see you're having big feelings. Let me get to a level that's not matching that, so that we're not screaming at each other and creating a lot of, unhelpful dynamics in terms of my standards versus your 4-year-old experience, right? And that's true with a 14-year-old and a 24-year-old and all of the developmental stages of parenting. And really recognizing that if my best was not great and I have not worked to improve that, if I have not worked to change what the expectation of the best is, then I'm doing the minimum. Because again, moving target, right? I tell people often, like, when you're new at anything, you're gonna suck. You're supposed to, right? There are certainly very talented people out there who like knock it out of the park the first time, but that's not their best. That's the first time. And so with practice, with follow through, with consistency, our best changes. And if we're not able to give ourselves a little bit of grace and leeway and only like get stuck at like, this is all I'm going to do. This is just who I am. Then doing your best doesn't really count. That said, sometimes, especially with mental health issues, with anxiety, with depression, with PTSD, with ADHD, with, spectrum disorder, like all the things, sometimes doing your best is just getting through. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that, like, sometimes my best is not going to look and feel to the observer or to myself, the best that I can do, right? I recognize that, like, sometimes when I'm not feeling well, I was looking over my journal. I've not done my best. When I was traveling, I was doing a journal every day. And part of that was helping me process through the feelings that I was talking about in the book and dealing with. And because I was by myself most of the time, it was really helpful for me to journal and meditate on a daily basis. That was part of my routine. And as I was looking back on my journal, because more recently I think I make an entry every 4 months, maybe. Just depends on what I'm going through. But I was looking back at almost a year ago, and I was sick. Had like a cold or something, and I was definitely feeling not great. I probably had a headache, probably was achy. And because I live alone, I was thinking, this is hard. I think when you live alone and you are spending time by yourself, or you don't have like immediate people, especially in the circumference of your experience, you think about, well, okay, I could kill over and die and nobody would know, right? That might just be my experience, but it's definitely an experience I have living alone, and I've lived alone for a while now. But I remember feeling not my best. I remember trying to figure out like how to do this and pull myself up out of that, like, anxiety spiral, and certainly that like depressive time. And as I've mentioned, like, seasonal depression is a bitch, and it definitely does not let you do your best, or you do your best at the time with how you feel, right? And part of my getting through really challenging times is acknowledging that, like, this is just right now. This is not forever. It's not a permanent state. And I do recognize that people deal with like chronic illness and chronic pain. And for those things, it does definitely feel more permanent. But recognizing, even in the words, right? Even in the language, a chronic illness is chronic. It happens longer over time, but it's not a permanent illness, right? Sometimes it's a permanent diagnosis. When we think about mood disorders, or, like I said, ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, some of those are chronic, and doing your best looks different every day. Sometimes when your brain is working so fast that it's really difficult to get things done and you don't feel effective. And so by the end of the day, you're beating yourself up because you didn't get all the things done, or you kind of left something in the middle and like forgot. I send invoices to clients that I see online, and sometimes they forget, right? They'll have their session, it'll be great, all the things, and then they'll step away from the computer, or the work will start, or, it just really depends, and then they don't pay me. So I send a reminder, right? I'm not taking it personally. I do recognize how life happens. But, they're doing the best with what they have in the moment, right? We need to finish the sentence. And when I know better, I will do better. So for some clients who I do recognize like have very busy lives, or have ADHD, or, are dealing with a lot, I'll just take a credit card over the video. Like, that's just easier. It's not a judgment. It's just like, let's just make this easier for you. And so now it's not something you have to have looming over your head, right? I think about, again, back to this idea of our experience when we're younger, when we're in relationships in general, and people are just doing their best. And I do recognize that some people just stop at their best, wherever level that is, right? It's not the best, it's just their best. And again, that excuse of like, this is just who I am, or I already know all the things. I'm not going to try harder. I'm not going to do more. You may remind me several times, and then I will do better for a while, and then I'll go back to my default setting. Sometimes the default setting is the best that they can do, and then we have to evaluate what our expectation of the best is. We have to evaluate what it is that we are expecting, but also what we want from a relationship dynamic, right? In parenting, I often see, well, specifically dealing with adults who are talking about their parented experience, is that like if they aren't doing the job, then they don't necessarily need the title, right? A lot of times people will say, oh, but they're my mom, or oh, but they're my dad, or oh, but they're my brother, family over everything. And I really do feel like that's not the most helpful expectation to put on an experience just because you have the title. If they're not doing the job, do they need the title? Consequently, do they need the expectation of your behavior in that dynamic? A long time ago, I think when maybe 10, 15 years ago, when, maybe 10 years, when the DNA testing started being more ubiquitously available, I had clients who were adopted and then found their birth parents. And that was was a challenging experience for some of my clients because they first had this now I know who this person is. If they didn't have that awareness before, now I know where they are. Like, how do I reach out to them? Do I not? It was a whole thing. And a lot of times they would connect with this biological relation and then realize that they don't fit the thing that I had in my mind. And so we had to process through that, and we had to recognize this is just a person. Yes, they share your DNA, but they haven't really done the job. And, for whatever reason, you had other people who did the job that aren't biologically related to you. But doing the job is the part that is important, doing their best to fulfill a role in a person's life. And so when we think about how we do every day, right, a lot of us, not me, but other people, work for, companies or organizations or whatever. And they can be in that position for a long time. They can move throughout the company, all the things. But on a regular basis, if the company is running well, they are evaluated based on their job description and then the job they did, right? And so I talk to people when it comes to relationships about that. And so back to this idea of doing their best, right? Once you know how to do the job, right? Bare minimum of parenting is food, shelter, clothing, right? That's what the state expects of you. And if you're doing extra, that's awesome, right? But bare minimum, food, shelter, clothing. I bring that up because when we're dealing with teenagers, and certainly when we're dealing with adults, right? Let's say people in their 20s who are living in your house rent-free. My job was to provide you food, shelter, clothing for a minimum of 18 years. And after that, hopefully I've done my job. Part of my job description is to prepare you for adulthood, is to make sure that you are able to provide those things for yourself. And that was, bare minimum, right? Under the best of circumstances, I will have given you the life skills to be able to provide food, shelter, clothing for yourself. I will have provided you with healthy awareness of yourself and other people. It's all these things that are, I will make sure that you know how to brush your teeth twice a day. I will hopefully have given you, some tools and skills to be socially appropriate or whatever it is. But really thinking about the job, right? And if you have somebody in their life, in your life, in our lives, who has a title and a role, are they doing the job, right? Or are they just doing the minimum? And if their best is the minimum, especially after some coaching or what is it called? A PIP, professional improvement plan, then you have consequences, right? If your best is still at a kind of rudimentary level, and with coaching and with, prompting and reminding and all the things, you haven't improved, then we get to evaluate things on a different level, right? Especially with, and I often, parents are overwhelmed, I get that, with trying to figure out how to create or at least foster or influence a functional adult in the planet who is a good person, right? That's higher level, but it is one of the goals of parenting is not just food, shelter, clothing. You're able to like talk and read and do math and all the things. But we want you to be a productive member of society, hopefully. One who's compassionate and kind. One who is a good steward of their stuff in the planet and all the things. That's the higher level of parenting. And when you recognize that sometimes my best is making sure that you have all the things you need to get in your backpack and make it through the day, being a productive member of society, whatever society you're in, we have to stay focused on like, how do I get you through third grade, right? How do I get you through 9 years old? How do I get you through October, right? Bring the scale down and you'll actually find that your best is a little bit better than you thought it was, right? When we have this big lofty expectation of productive member of society, then every little thing that you're doing in your 9-year-old body or, in your third grade classroom, it feels like a serious like task to be able to get you to productive member of society. Slow down your roll. Like the best you can do is sometimes get through Friday, right? Today is Halloween. There are lots of holiday parties and, different things in the classroom. Candy is a big part of Halloween, which is counterintuitive to the my kid can have no sugar situation. And let's just get through today, right? Do your best today. And if you feel as though your best isn't besting, then what do you do to improve, right? And so how do you get through? For me, it's October through February 1st, and every day is a different challenge. I don't feel as down and frustrated as I did a couple weeks ago, and part of that is focusing on what I can get through in the day, in the week. I'm not going hour by hour, which is nice, but some people are. And so that is their best at the time. Really having grace, less for, obviously have grace for other people, patience, obviously getting through being 9 is a challenge, but also have grace for yourself. Sometimes your best is putting on clothes, clean ones preferably, brushing your teeth, at least at some point. And getting through whatever it is your morning looks like. For me, it was brewed coffee, which I haven't been doing in a while. My goodness, it's so good. And, showing up and being at work today, giving you guys a podcast, like that's my best today. I got through the week, which I marked off so many things in October that I needed to get done, and I'm very proud of myself for doing all of those things. Your best is a moving target. And sometimes when you acknowledge, ooh, that was not my best, then you do it differently. And you hopefully try to do it better. But it is not a destination, it's a process, just like everything else. And so minimize your expectations to how do I get through today? How do I get this little through today? And, with the eventual goal of productive member of society, how do I get them through third grade, right? How do I get them through the end of the year with, minimal damage to their cute little self-esteems? How do I encourage them to be the best version of themselves in the moment, right? There's your nugget. I did find a new office. I will be moving to an office in Corrales with a friend and colleague's practice. I won't be working for them, but I'll be working out of that space. So for those of you who are my clients, I will remind you on the days you have in-person appointments. But I'm grateful, right? I am so excited. I'm actually going to Las Vegas this weekend for the day to see Alanis Morissette in concert, which that is like a lifetime goal. And I'm so grateful and blessed to be able to have that opportunity. I get to go traveling with my sister, which I'm super excited about. I'm going to fly out of Denver, so I'm going to take the dog to hang out with my daughter Anyway, that's just a little snippet into my life. I know that I share a lot of things with you guys, but hey, 3 years ago, I was landing in Dublin and spent Halloween in Ireland. Um, I'm grateful for the life that I have, period. And I'm grateful that doing my best is a moving target because then I can give myself a little bit of grace and acknowledge all the things, the hard things that I've gone through to be able to get to this place. And I love giving that to clients and letting them know, hey, right now, this is not your best, but, and you get to figure out what your best is. You get to change what the expectation is, and you get to give yourself a little bit of grace and patience. When you do that, you can model it for the people who are paying attention. And you get to decide, right? Who gets to have the role of whatever it is in your life, if they're doing the job or not. And if their best is the bare minimum, you can have the expectation to either stay and hope that they get better or change the situation, right? Change the role and title. Sometimes we can take the job away from someone. We're not going to do that today, right? There's your nugget. I will talk to you very soon. Again, traveling, getting a new office, doing all the things, drinking brewed coffee. I will talk to you guys soon. Take care. All right.